is the land before America, indigenous nations and first European footsteps, pre-1600, aerials of the North American landscape before the United States of America existed, before the idea of states, borders, or colonies. This land was already home to millions, a land filled with forests, rivers, mountains, deserts, and coastlines that would one day form the United States. Indigenous nations of the future U.S. territory. For thousands of years, hundreds of indigenous nations lived across the lands that would become the United States. These were not scattered tribes, these were complex societies. In the Mississippi Valley, the builders of Cahokia constructed massive earthen pyramids and one of the largest cities in North America. In the Southwest, the Pueblo and peoples engineered advanced irrigation systems and multi-story stone villages. Along the Atlantic coast, nations like the Powhatan, Wampanoag, and Pequot thrived through farming, fishing, and trade. In the Great Plains, the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Pawnee cultures developed sophisticated hunting systems and spiritual traditions. In the Southeast, nations such as the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek governed strong political alliances. These civilizations traded across long distances, developed agricultural systems, governed through councils and alliances, and shaped the environment they lived in. This land was not empty, it was home. Culture, spirituality, and society. Each nation had its own language, beliefs, and way of life, but many shared a deep spiritual connection to the land, seeing rivers, mountains, and forests not just as resources but as relatives. Their societies were rich with oral history, astronomy, environmental knowledge, and diplomacy. For thousands of years, this continent thrived under indigenous stewardship. First contacts near American shores. The first known outsiders to reach the edges of what would become the United States were Norse explorers. Around the year 1000, Vikings briefly settled in parts of modern Canada and possibly touched the Northern American coasts, but these early visits were short-lived. The dawn of European exploration, late 1400s-1500s. The true turning point came in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. As European empires expanded, explorers began charting the coastline of the future United States. Spanish explorers landed in what is now Florida and the Southwest. French expeditions mapped the Mississippi River and Great Lakes. English explorers surveyed the Atlantic coast, seeking new territory and new opportunities. Although permanent settlements had not yet taken root, Europe's interest in these lands had begun. The stage was set for dramatic change. For thousands of years, the future United States was shaped entirely by its native nations. But by the year 1600, the world was on the edge of transformation. European powers were preparing to settle. Indigenous nations were about to face challenges unlike any before, and the foundations of what would eventually become the United States were about to be laid. This is where the American story begins, on a land full of life, culture, and civilization, long before it was called the United States. The age of colonization and the birth of the 13 English colonies, 1607 to 1750, opening shot, early morning over the Atlantic, approaching land. The 17th century marks a decisive turning point in American history. This is when European ambition, indigenous power, and the search for new opportunity collided, laying the first foundations of what would one day become the United States. The first permanent English footprint, Jamestown, 1607. In 1607, English settlers established Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English colony in North America. Life was harsh. Disease, hunger, and conflict with the Powhatan Confederacy nearly wiped out the settlement. But Jamestown survived, thanks to new supplies, support from England, and the leadership of figures like Captain John Smith. Then came a discovery that changed everything: tobacco. John Rolfe's successful cultivation of tobacco transformed Virginia into a profitable colony and cemented England's long-term presence in the New World. With profit came expansion. With expansion came conflict. And in 1619, a tragic cornerstone of America was laid: the first recorded arrival of enslaved Africans in English America. New England colonies, faith, order, and community, 1620-1690. Far to the north, a different kind of colony emerged. In 1620, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, driven not by wealth but by religious freedom. Their struggles were great, but with help from the Wampanoag people, they survived and celebrated the first harvest feast that Americans now call Thanksgiving. Soon after, Puritans founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Their society stressed education, religion, and strict social order. Harvard College was founded in 1636, the first institution of higher learning in the future United States. The New England colonies became centers of trade, shipbuilding, and community life, shaping early American culture. The Middle Colonies, diversity and opportunity, 1626-1750. Dutch traders in New Amsterdam, bustling markets, Quaker meetings. To the west, the Middle Colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, were born from Dutch, Swedish, and later English rule. New Amsterdam, founded by the Dutch, became New York after English takeover in 1664. Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, became a model of tolerance, welcoming Quakers, Germans, Scots, Irish, and others seeking freedom and opportunity. These colonies became known for diversity, trade, and fertile farmland. They would later play a central role in shaping America's political and cultural identity. The Southern colonies, plantations and slavery, 1630-1750. In the Southern colonies, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia, large plantations defined society. Crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo drove economic growth. But this growth depended on enslaved African labor. By the early 1700s, slavery had become deeply embedded in the Southern economy and would shape America's future in profound and painful ways. The road to revolution, rivalry, taxes, and rising tensions, 1750-1775, map of North America in the mid-1700s. By the mid-18th century, the 13 British colonies had grown rapidly. Towns expanded, trade flourished, and a unique American culture began to take shape. But beneath the prosperity, the balance of power in North America was shifting, and a great conflict was about to reshape the future of the continent. The French and Indian War, 1754-1763. The spark came from rivalry between two European empires, Britain and France. Both claimed vast regions of North America, especially the rich Ohio River Valley. What began as a dispute over land quickly escalated into the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the global 7 Years' War. Indigenous nations played crucial roles, choosing alliances carefully to protect their homelands. Battles raged from the Great Lakes to the Appalachian Mountains. Colonial militias, alongside British troops, fought to push back French influence. After years of fighting, Britain emerged victorious. France surrendered nearly all its North American territories. The British Empire now dominated the continent. But victory came at a tremendous cost. The war's expense and the taxes that followed Britain's war debt had skyrocketed. To recover money, the British government turned to the colonies, and this decision would change everything. Parliament introduced new taxes: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. For the first time, colonists were forced to pay taxes not approved by their own local assemblies. To the British it was fair. The colonies should help pay for their own protection. To the colonists it violated a core principle: no taxation without representation. Protests, unity, and growing resistance. Across the colonies, anger erupted. Merchants organized boycotts. Newspapers printed fiery articles. Secret groups like the Sons of Liberty mobilized crowds. In 1765, protests forced Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act. But tensions didn't fade. They deepened. British troops arrived in Boston to enforce order, creating constant friction between soldiers and citizens. The Boston Massacre, 1770. On a cold March night in 1770, tension exploded. A confrontation between colonists and British soldiers turned deadly. Shots were fired. 5 colonists lay dead. News of the Boston Massacre spread like wildfire. Pamphlets and engravings portrayed it as an attack on unarmed civilians, fueling outrage and strengthening resistance to British rule. The Boston Tea Party, 1773. Britain attempted to impose one final tax on tea. The colonists refused to accept it. In December 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk warriors boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped an entire shipment of British tea into the water. It was an act of direct rebellion, bold, defiant, and unmistakable. The Intolerable Acts and the First Continental Congress. Britain responded with harsh punishments known as the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston Harbor and tightening control over Massachusetts. Instead of breaking the colonies, these actions united them. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress. For the first time, the colonies spoke with a collective voice, demanding rights and preparing for the possibility of conflict. By 1775, trust between Britain and its American colonies had collapsed. British troops marched to seize colonial weapons near Boston. Militia units prepared to defend their communities. The road to open rebellion had begun. The American Revolution was no longer a distant idea, it was imminent. The American Revolution, War for Independence, 1775–1783, dawn over Lexington Green, muskets in silhouette. By the spring of 1775, tensions between the colonies and Britain were at a breaking point. Colonial militias drilled in anticipation. British troops prepared to enforce imperial authority. The fragile peace shattered on April 19, 1775, the day the first shots of the American Revolution were fired. Lexington and Concord British soldiers marched from Boston to seize colonial weapons. Militia units, warned by riders like Paul Revere, rushed to intercept them. At Lexington, a brief but historic exchange of gunfire erupted. The shot heard round the world. At Concord's North Bridge, colonial forces pushed the British back. As the Redcoats retreated toward Boston, thousands of militiamen lined the roads, turning the march into a running battle. The Revolution had begun. The Continental Army and George Washington. Soon after the fighting began, colonial leaders met once again in Philadelphia. They formed the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as its commander. Washington faced enormous challenges, little training, scarce supplies, and a powerful professional enemy. But his leadership, resilience, and strategic patience would become the backbone of the American cause. The struggle for Boston and early battles. The Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775 proved the colonists' determination. British forces captured the hill but suffered heavy losses, a sobering realization that the war would not be easy. By March 1776, with cannons dragged from Fort Ticonderoga by Henry Knox, colonial forces forced the British to evacuate Boston entirely. The Revolution was no longer a rebellion. It was a fight for a new nation. Declaration of Independence in 1776. As the war intensified, colonial leaders made a bold decision. On July 4, 1776, representatives of the 13 colonies approved a document that would change world history. The Declaration of Independence. It proclaimed that all people are created equal, and that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. With these words, the colonies officially became the United States of America. A war on the edge of defeat. Despite the declaration, the war's outcome was far from certain. British forces captured New York City in late 1776, nearly destroying the Continental Army. But Washington refused to give up. In a daring Christmas night maneuver, he crossed the icy Delaware River and struck at Trenton, followed by a victory at Princeton. These triumphs revived American morale and kept the Revolution alive. Turning point at Saratoga, 1737. In 1777, American forces won a decisive victory at the Battle of Saratoga in upstate New York. This triumph convinced France that the United States could win the war. France entered the conflict as an ally, providing money, supplies, naval power, and troops. The struggle for independence had now become a global war. Winter at Valley Forge, 1777–1778. The winter encampment at Valley Forge became a test of endurance. Thousands of soldiers faced hunger, cold, and disease. But training led by Baron von Steuben transformed the army into a disciplined fighting force. Out of suffering came strength, unity, and renewed resolve. The Southern Campaign and guerrilla warfare. As the war dragged on, the British shifted strategy to the south, hoping to rally loyalist support. Cities like Savannah and Charleston fell, but American fighters d'etats, including Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, used guerrilla tactics to disrupt British operations. The southern countryside became a grinding battleground of raids, ambushes, and shifting control. Yorktown, the final blow, 1781. In 1781, British General Cornwallis entrenched his army at Yorktown, Virginia. American and French forces swiftly surrounded the position. With the French Navy blocking escape by sea, Cornwallis was trapped. After weeks of bombardment, he surrendered. The war, for all practical purposes, was over. The birth of a new nation, 1783. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized the independence of the United States. A new nation had emerged, fragile, untested, and filled with possibility. The Revolution had transformed 13 British colonies into a sovereign country. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead, creating a stable government, defining freedom, and building a nation that could survive. Building a new government from Revolution to Constitution, 1783-1800. The Continental Congress, papers scattered, tired faces after years of war. In 1783, the United States emerged victorious from the Revolutionary War. But independence brought new challenges. The war had united the colonies. Now they had to learn how to govern themselves. The Articles of Confederation. A weak first attempt. The young nation began under the Articles of Confederation, a system designed to avoid tyranny at all costs. It created a loose alliance of states, a league of friendship, with no president, no national court system, and very limited federal powers. States printed their own money. States negotiated their own trade. States argued like rivals, not partners. The United States had won a war, but risked losing its future. Crisis and chaos. The nation on the brink. By the mid-1780s, economic troubles spread across the country. The government was too weak to tax, too weak to regulate commerce, and too weak to enforce laws. The breaking point came in 1786 during Shays' Rebellion, when farmers in Massachusetts rose up against high taxes and crushing debt. Armed citizens marched on courthouses. State militias clashed with protesters. The rebellion shocked leaders across America. It became clear something had to change, or the nation might collapse. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 delegates from 12 states gathered in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. Their mission: fix the Articles of Confederation, but soon they decided to create something entirely different. Inside the hot, sealed chamber of Independence Hall, ideas collided. Should representation be based on population or equality among states? How much power should the government have? How do you prevent tyranny, yet preserve unity? Compromises were struck: a House of Representatives based on population, a Senate with equal representation for each state, a stronger federal government with separate branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. After months of debate, the delegates signed the United States Constitution, a bold new framework that balanced power, liberty, and stability. The Federalist versus Anti-Federalist battle. Ratifying the Constitution ignited fierce debate. Federalists argued the new system was necessary for national survival. Anti-Federalists warned it could lead to tyranny, demanding protections for individual rights. The result was one of the most important documents in American history. The Bill of Rights, 10 amendments guaranteeing freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and more. With these protections, the Constitution was ratified. The United States finally had a functioning government, a new capital, a new president, a new beginning. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. He defined the role with humility and strength, setting precedents still followed today. Congress took shape. The Supreme Court convened for the first time. The new nation began to breathe on its own. Washington urged unity, warning against political factions. But despite his words, two powerful political parties emerged: Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, and Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson. America's political identity was forming. Hamilton's financial plan and national foundations. To stabilize the economy, Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, proposed bold ideas: a national bank, a federal assumption of state debts, support for American manufacturing. His vision created the financial backbone of the United States, even as it sparked intense political conflict. By the mid-1790s, the nation stood stronger than ever, but increasingly divided. Washington's farewell and the peaceful transfer of power. In 1796, Washington stepped down after 2 terms, establishing a tradition that became part of American political culture. The election that followed, between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, tested the young nation. For the first time in modern history, leadership changed peacefully through a democratic vote. The United States had survived war, economic chaos, political conflict, and the challenge of nation building. By 1800, the United States was no longer an experiment. It was a functioning democratic republic, ready to expand, evolve, and confront its next set of challenges. Expansion, conflict, and the rise of American identity, 1800-1850. A map of a young United States, sun rising over endless frontier. At the dawn of the 19th century, the United States was still a small nation along the Atlantic coast, but its ambitions stretched far beyond its borders. A new generation of leaders believed America was destined to expand across rivers, mountains, and continents. The Jefferson Era and the Louisiana Purchase, 1803. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made one of the most important decisions in American history. For $15 million, the United States purchased the vast Louisiana Territory from France. The nation instantly doubled in size. From the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, a new world opened. To explore it, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, a 2-year journey through uncharted lands, powerful rivers, dense forests, and towering mountains. Their expedition mapped the West and forged connections with indigenous nations. Rising tensions and the War of 1812. But expansion came with danger. British interference with American trade and the impressment of sailors pushed the nation toward conflict. In 1812, the United States declared war on Britain. American ships battled the Royal Navy. Washington, D.C. burned. The young nation stood on the edge of defeat until victories at places like New Orleans shifted momentum. The war ended in stalemate, but something had changed. For the first time, Americans began to see themselves not as former colonists, but as citizens of a rising nation. The era of good feelings and national unity. The years after the war brought a spirit of unity. Political divisions temporarily faded. The economy grew. New roads and canals connected distant regions. The Erie Canal transformed the movement of goods and people, bridging the Atlantic states to the interior. A wave of optimism swept the nation, a belief in American potential. The age of Andrew Jackson. Democracy and division. In the 1820s, Andrew Jackson emerged as a champion of the common man. His election symbolized expanding democracy. More Americans than ever could vote. But Jackson's presidency also brought deep conflict. Battles with the National Bank, fierce political rivalries, and the tragic Indian Removal Act of 1830. Thousands of Native Americans were forced from their lands and marched west in the Trail of Tears, one of the darkest chapters in American history. Manifest Destiny. A continental dream. By the 1840s, a powerful idea swept through American culture. The belief that the United States was destined to stretch from ocean to ocean. Pioneers crossed plains and mountains on the Oregon Trail. Independent settlers in Texas clashed with Mexico, leading to the Texas Revolution and the annexation of the new republic. The push westward drove innovation, migration, and conflict. The Mexican-American War, 1846-1848. As tensions with Mexico grew, war erupted. American forces advanced through northern Mexico, capturing cities and securing victory. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo reshaped the continent. The United States gained California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. The nation had expanded dramatically, but new lands brought a dangerous question. Would slavery spread into the West? The California Gold Rush, 1848, 1850, and 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. News spread like wildfire. Tens of thousands of people from across the world rushed west, seeking fortune. Towns exploded overnight. Railroads grew. California's population surged, and in 1850 it entered the Union as a free state. The gold rush energized American expansion, but also intensified political battles over slavery. A nation stretched between promise and peril. By 1850, the United States had transformed from a fragile young country into a continental power. Its economy boomed. Its territory sprawled across forests, plains, deserts, and mountains. But beneath the surface, deep tensions simmered. Every new state, every new territory reopened a bitter question. Would the nation remain united or break apart over slavery? The answers would shape the next era of American history, an era of conflict, fire, and transformation. The Civil War and Reconstruction, 1850-1877, storm clouds. Over a divided map of the United States by the 1850s, the United States stood at a crossroads. The nation had grown rich in land, culture, and ambition, but enslaved labor powered much of its economy. As America expanded west, every new territory forced a painful question. Would slavery grow with it or end? The balance between freedom and oppression was collapsing. Compromises and failure. 1850-1859. For decades, Congress tried to maintain peace through fragile compromises, but each agreement only delayed the inevitable. The Compromise of 1850 tried to ease tensions by admitting California as a free state. The Fugitive Slave Act angered the North by forcing citizens to help capture escaped enslaved people. The Kansas-Nebraska Act let settlers decide the future of slavery themselves, leading to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. The nation watched in shock as neighbors turned against each other. A country on the edge. Writers, activists, and abolitionists intensified the national conversation. Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin exposed the brutality of slavery, shaking the conscience of the country. In 1857, the Supreme Court delivered the Dred Scott decision, declaring that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no power to stop slavery's expansion. The ruling deepened the divide. The political system was breaking. The election of Abraham Lincoln, 1860. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on a platform opposing the spread of slavery. For Southern leaders, this was unacceptable. Within weeks, Southern states began to secede, forming the Confederate States of America. The nation was splitting in two. Fort Sumter. The war begins, 1861. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. The Civil War had begun. Both sides prepared for a conflict they believed would end quickly. Instead, the war would become the deadliest in American history. The battlefields of America. The war swept across the continent, from the hills of Tennessee to the plains of Kansas, from the forests of Virginia to the Mississippi River. At Antietam, the bloodiest single day in American history left thousands dead. At Gettysburg, Union forces turned back a massive Confederate invasion. In the West, Ulysses S. Grant captured the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. The nation was soaked in sacrifice. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate territory free. The war was no longer just a fight for Union. It had become a battle for human freedom. African American soldiers joined the Union Army, fighting bravely for their liberation and the future of their country. The fall of the Confederacy, 1864-1865. As Union forces advanced, the Confederacy weakened. General William Tecumseh Sherman's march through Georgia shattered Southern infrastructure and morale. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. The Civil War was over, but peace brought new challenges. Lincoln's assassination. Just days after victory, the nation's joy turned to heartbreak. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater, a moment that shocked the world and changed the course of Reconstruction. Reconstruction, rebuilding a broken nation, 1865-1877. In the years after the war, the United States faced the enormous task of reunifying the country and redefining freedom. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to formerly enslaved people. The 15th Amendment protected the right to vote. For the first time, Black Americans held political office, built schools, founded communities, and shaped democracy. But resistance was fierce. White supremacist groups rose. Southern states imposed black codes to control the newly freed population. The struggle for equality had only begun. The end of Reconstruction. In 1877, federal troops withdrew from the South, ending Reconstruction. Progress reversed. Segregation, discrimination, and violence spread under Jim Crow laws. The promise of freedom dimmed, but it never disappeared. A fractured but enduring union, the Civil War and Reconstruction transformed the United States forever. The nation had confronted its greatest moral crisis, ended slavery, and fought to rebuild democracy. But the unresolved battles over race, identity, and equality would echo long into the future, shaping America for generations. The Gilded Age and Industrial Rise, 1877-1914. A transformational America, cities glowing with electric light. By the late 19th century, the United States stood at the threshold of extraordinary change. The scars of the Civil War were still fresh, but a new era was rising. An age of steel, steam, electricity, and ambition. America was becoming an industrial giant. The birth of modern industry. Factories multiplied. Rails stretched across mountains and deserts. Cities exploded with growth. Powerful industrialists emerged, men whose influence shaped the future of the nation. Andrew Carnegie built a steel empire. John D. Rockefeller dominated oil. J.P. Morgan controlled banking and finance. Cornelius Vanderbilt shaped railroads and shipping. They were hailed as captains of industry and condemned as robber barons. Their wealth was unimaginable, their power unmatched. Urbanization. America moves to the cities. Millions of Americans left farms and rural towns seeking opportunity in industrial centers. Skyscrapers reached toward the clouds. Streetcars and early automobiles transformed daily life. But urban life brought challenges. Overcrowding, pollution, crime, and poverty. Tenements housed entire families in small, dark rooms. Factories demanded long hours for low wages. The Gilded Age glittered, but beneath the surface lay hardship. Immigration, a new American mosaic. Between 1880 and 1910, more than 20 million immigrants arrived from Europe and Asia. New languages, cultures, and traditions reshaped the American identity. Ellis Island in New York Harbor became the gateway for millions of hopes and dreams. Families carrying all they owned passed through its halls, seeking a future free from poverty, war, or persecution. But immigrants also faced discrimination, harsh working conditions, and cultural conflict. Yet they helped build the railroads, factories, and infrastructure that powered the nation. The labor movement, fighting for rights. Industrialization brought prosperity for some and exploitation for many. Workers toiled in dangerous factories with little protection. Soon labor unions rose to demand fairness. The Knights of Labor sought broad reform. The American Federation of Labor pushed for better wages and hours. Strikes erupted across the country, some peaceful, others violent. The Haymarket Affair, the Pullman Strike, and other clashes exposed the tensions of the new industrial world. The Age of Invention. The Gilded Age was also the age of innovation. Inventors reshaped the way people lived, worked, and communicated. Thomas Edison lit up cities with electricity. Alexander Graham Bell connected the world with the telephone. The Wright brothers launched the first powered flight in 1903. A new century of possibility had begun. The rise of the United States as a global power. As America grew economically, it grew more confident on the world stage. The Spanish-American War of 1898 marked a turning point. In just a few months, the United States defeated Spain and gained influence over territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. For the first time, the United States stepped into the role of an imperial power, a role that sparked pride, controversy, and debate. The Progressive Movement. Reform and change. By the early 1900s, reformers known as progressives pushed to fix the problems created by rapid growth. They fought corruption, challenged monopolies, and demanded safer working conditions. Journalists, muckrakers, exposed injustices in cities, factories, and government. Under leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, new laws protected consumers, preserved natural lands, and reined in corporate power. National parks expanded. Government oversight increased. America was reinventing itself once again, a nation on the edge of a new century. By 1914, the United States had been transformed from a war-torn republic into an industrial superpower. Its factories roared. Its cities pulsed with energy. Its people came from every corner of the globe. But across the Atlantic, a storm was gathering, one that would pull America onto the world stage in ways no one could imagine. World wars and global power. 1914-1945. A quiet America watches war erupt in Europe. In 1914, Europe plunged into chaos. Empires collided. Nations mobilized millions. The First World War had begun. Across the ocean, the United States watched, determined to stay neutral. America enters World War I, 1917. For nearly 3 years, the United States avoided direct involvement, but German submarine attacks, threats to American ships, and the infamous Zimmermann telegram shifted public sentiment. In April 1917, America entered the war. Factories roared to life. Millions enlisted. Fresh American troops helped tip the balance on the Western Front. By November 1918, the war ended. The world was shattered, but the United States emerged stronger than ever. The Roaring Twenties, prosperity and change. The 1920s brought a wave of energy and transformation. Jazz filled the air. Automobiles crowded the streets. Skyscrapers pierced the skyline. New technologies reshaped daily life. Radios, refrigerators, and moving pictures. Women gained the right to vote in 1920, marking a major milestone in American democracy. It was a decade of boldness and excess, prohibition and organized crime. In 1920, alcohol became illegal nationwide. But instead of ending drinking, prohibition unleashed a surge of underground crime. Bootleggers smuggled liquor. Speakeasies flourished. Figures like Al Capone became infamous. The amendment meant to uplift society, instead created a thriving black market and a new era of lawlessness. The Great Depression, 1929. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. Banks collapsed. Factories shut down. Millions lost jobs, homes, and hope. The Great Depression became the deepest economic crisis in American history. Breadlines stretched through cities. Dust storms devastated farms across the Midwest. The nation felt broken. FDR and the New Deal. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt became president, promising a New Deal for the American people. Over the next decade, sweeping programs reshaped the country. Jobs through the Works Progress Administration, banking reform, Social Security, public infrastructure on a massive scale. Roosevelt's leadership revived the economy and restored faith, but recovery remained incomplete. World War II begins, 1939. As America rebuilt, another war erupted in Europe. Nazi Germany swept across the continent. Japan expanded across Asia. The world spiraled into conflict. But once again, the United States stayed neutral. Until December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor and America's entry. Japanese aircraft descended on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, destroying battleships and killing thousands. The attack jolted the nation. The next day, the United States declared war. World War II had become America's fight. America mobilizes for total war. The entire nation transformed into a war machine. Factories shifted from cars to tanks, from appliances to aircraft. Women entered the workforce in record numbers. symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. Millions of soldiers headed overseas. American forces fought across two vast theaters, in Europe against Nazi Germany, in the Pacific across islands held by Japan. The scale was unprecedented. Turning the tide. In Europe, American forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in 1944 during D-Day, a massive assault that broke through Hitler's defenses. In the Pacific, bloody battles at Midway, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa brought America closer to Japan's mainland. The atomic age begins by 1945. Germany surrendered, but Japan continued to fight. In August 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, weapons of unimaginable power. Japan surrendered. World War II, the deadliest conflict in human history, had ended. A new global superpower. The United States emerged from the war with immense military strength, economic power, and global influence. But victory came with a new responsibility and a new rival. The next era would be defined by tension, technology, and the threat of nuclear conflict. The Cold War era, 1945-1991. A divided world map, half in shadow, half in light. When World War II ended, two superpowers stood above all others, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their armies never clashed directly, but their rivalry shaped nearly every aspect of global politics, science, culture, and conflict for almost half a century. This was the Cold War, the origins of a global standoff. The ideological divide was stark. The United States championed democracy and capitalism. The Soviet Union promoted communism and state control. Neither side trusted the other. Both sought to shape the future of the post-war world. Europe became the first battleground for influence. To stop the spread of communism, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, a massive effort to rebuild Western Europe's shattered economies. The Iron Curtain falls over Europe. Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control. Germany was split into East and West. Berlin, deep inside Soviet territory, became a symbol of the divided world. In 1948, a Soviet blockade threatened to starve West Berlin into submission. The United States responded with the Berlin Airlift, a daring operation delivering food and supplies by aircraft for nearly a year. The blockade failed. The Cold War intensified. Nuclear arms race, the balance of terror. Both superpowers rushed to build nuclear weapons. The power of these bombs was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Mutually assured destruction, the idea that a nuclear war would destroy both sides, kept peace through fear. At any moment, a mistake or miscalculation could end civilization. The Korean War, 1950-1953. The Cold War turned hot on the Korean Peninsula. Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United States joined a United Nations force to push them back. The war raged for 3 years, ending in stalemate. The peninsula divided at the 38th parallel, a division that still exists. The space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. The world was shocked. The space age had begun. The United States responded by creating NASA. Scientific competition intensified, leading to rapid advancements. In 1969, America achieved one of humanity's greatest milestones. A rocket soared into the sky. A capsule touched the lunar surface. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962. The Cold War reached its most dangerous moment when the Soviet Union secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. For 13 tense days, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. Diplomacy prevailed. The missiles were removed. A fragile peace survived. The Vietnam War, 1955-1975. Determined to stop the spread of communism, the United States became increasingly involved in Vietnam. What began as support for South Vietnam grew into a massive, controversial war. Jungles, guerrilla tactics, and unclear objectives made victory elusive. At home, protests erupted. American society divided sharply. In 1975, when Saigon fell, the war ended, leaving deep wounds and unanswered questions. The Cold War at home, culture, fear, and change. The Cold War shaped American life in countless ways. Civil defense drills in schools practiced for nuclear attack. Hollywood produced films about spies, invasions, and atomic danger. The Red Scare fueled suspicion, blacklists, and political persecution. Meanwhile, social transformations unfolded. The civil rights movement, feminism, environmental activism, and cultural revolutions reshaped America. A new hope for peace. By the 1980s, tensions thawed. Leaders in both nations began negotiating arms reductions. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev held historic summits, signing agreements to limit nuclear weapons. The Soviet Union weakened economically and politically. Its hold over Eastern Europe began to crumble. The fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989. On a cold November night, thousands of East and West Berliners gathered at the wall that had divided their lives for decades. Under pressure and confusion, border guards opened the gates. People climbed the wall. They embraced. They celebrated freedom. Piece by piece, the symbol of division was torn down. The end of the Soviet Union, 1991. 2 years later, the Soviet Union dissolved. The Cold War, one of the longest and most dangerous rivalries in history, had ended without a nuclear catastrophe. A United States unchallenged in the ashes of the Cold War, the United States stood as the world's sole superpower, economically, militarily, and culturally dominant. But a new era was beginning, one defined by globalization, technology, and unseen threats. Post-Cold War America and the rise of a new global order, 1991-2001, globe rotating, Soviet flag lowering, American flag rising in 1991. After decades of tension, the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union dissolved. The world's balance of power shifted dramatically. For the first time in modern history, the United States stood alone as the world's sole superpower. The undisputed superpower. With its rivals gone, the United States entered the 1990s in a position of unmatched strength. Its economy was the world's largest. Its military was the most advanced. Its culture, movies, music, technology, fashion, shaped global trends. But new power brought new responsibilities and new challenges. The Gulf War, 1990-1991. Barely a year before the Cold War ended, a new crisis erupted in the Middle East. Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait. The United States responded by organizing a massive international coalition. In a swift military campaign, American-led forces liberated Kuwait. The war demonstrated the U.S. military's technological superiority and reinforced its global leadership. Technology transforms America. The 1990s saw a technological explosion unlike anything before. Personal computers, once rare, became household items. A new digital network, the Internet, connected people around the world. Email replaced letters. Websites replaced encyclopedias. Startups in Silicon Valley grew into global tech giants. America became the center of the information age, a booming economy. The U.S. economy surged. Stock markets climbed. Unemployment fell. New industries, software, biotechnology, telecommunications, created millions of jobs. For many, the 1990s felt like a time of optimism and endless possibility. The decade became known as a new American golden age. Social, cultural, and political shift. American society continued to evolve. Immigration increased, making the nation more diverse than ever before. Pop culture thrived. Hip-hop, cable television, blockbuster movies, and video games shaped a new generation. Politics reflected the changing times. Debates over healthcare, global trade, and government spending became central national issues. In 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president, the first from a new generation of leaders raised after World War II. The rise of globalization. American companies expanded worldwide. Factories moved overseas. Goods, ideas, and cultures flowed across borders faster than ever before. Supporters saw it as economic progress. Critics saw jobs disappearing and local industries weakening. But one thing was clear: the United States was deeply connected to the world. The growing threat no one expected. While the 1990s were mostly peaceful for Americans at home, A new type of enemy was emerging far from the public eye. Extremist groups abroad targeted American interests. Attacks on U.S. embassies in Africa, the bombing of the USS Cole, signs of a rising danger. Most Americans were unaware that a storm was gathering, one that would change the world. Skyline of New York. On a clear morning by the dawn of the new millennium, the United States was prosperous, confident, and globally dominant. The Internet age was reshaping society. A new century held boundless promise. But on a peaceful September morning in 2001, everything would change. America in the 21st century, from 9/11 to 2025. Morning sky over New York City, September 11, 2001. The 21st century opened with promise, prosperity, and technological optimism. But in a single morning, everything changed. September 11, 2001. 4 hijacked airplanes, 2 crashing into the Twin Towers, 1 striking the Pentagon, another brought down in Pennsylvania by passengers who refused to surrender. Nearly 3,000 lives lost, a skyline transformed, a nation shaken to its core. In the aftermath, Americans united in grief, resilience, and determination. The world stood with the United States, but the course of history had been irrevocably altered. The War on Terror. After 9/11, the United States launched a global campaign to dismantle terrorist networks. Afghanistan, 2001. American forces toppled the Taliban regime that had sheltered al-Qaeda. The war grew into a 20-year conflict, the longest in U.S. history. Iraq, 2003. Believing Iraq held weapons of mass destruction, U.S. forces invaded. Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed quickly, but the war triggered years of instability, insurgency, and regional conflict. Across the Middle East, American military involvement reshaped geopolitics and sparked decades of debate back home. America at home. Fear, security, and change. New security laws expanded government surveillance. Airports transformed overnight. Threat levels, terror alerts, and new agencies became part of daily life. Yet in the face of fear, Americans also adapted, rebuilding, remembering, and striving to protect freedom while confronting new dangers. A new digital revolution. The early 2000s witnessed the rise of a new kind of power, digital power. Smartphones replaced computers. Social media connected billions. Online platforms reshaped politics, culture, and business. Google, Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, and Apple became pillars of a new digital empire. America led the world into an age of instant information and unprecedented connectivity. The 2008 financial crisis. But prosperity cracked in 2008. A housing bubble burst. Banks collapsed. Stock markets crashed. Millions lost homes and jobs. The Great Recession became the worst economic disaster since the 1930s. The government responded with massive rescue programs to stabilize the economy. Americans endured hardship, but also saw the birth of new industries and later, a long recovery. An era of social change. The 2010s brought profound cultural transformation. Marriage equality became the law of the land. Movements like Black Lives Matter drew attention to racial injustice. Debates over immigration, healthcare, climate change, and gun rights intensified. The nation grew more diverse than ever before. Generations clashed over values and visions for America's future. Social media amplified every conversation, every argument, every moment. Political divisions deepened. The political landscape grew sharply polarized. Elections became battlegrounds of ideology, identity, and emotion. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president, symbolizing hope and historic change. In 2016, Donald Trump's election signaled deep frustration with traditional politics. America entered a period of intense division, urban versus rural, conservative versus liberal, globalist versus nationalist. The world watched as the United States struggled with questions about identity, leadership, and unity. Technological acceleration. While politics divided the nation, technology continued to reshape everyday life. Electric cars accelerated the shift toward sustainability. Space exploration returned to prominence, with private companies joining NASA's mission. Artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics pushed industries into the future. Streaming platforms revolutionized entertainment. America stood at the forefront of a new technological frontier. The COVID-19 pandemic, 2020-2022. In early 2020, an invisible threat swept across the world. The COVID-19 pandemic shut down cities, schools, businesses, and borders. Hospital beds filled. Millions lost their lives worldwide. Economies halted. Daily routines vanished overnight. But in unprecedented time, American scientists developed vaccines using mRNA technology, a breakthrough that saved countless lives. The pandemic exposed vulnerabilities, deepened divisions, and changed society forever. America in Transition, 2022-2025. As the pandemic eased, the United States stepped into a new chapter. Economic recovery accelerated, though challenges remained. Debates over inflation, global competition, and national security shaped political discourse. Rivalry with China defined foreign policy. Energy and climate strategies evolved, balancing innovation and environmental concerns. Artificial intelligence, automation, and biotech became the engines of a new technological era. Meanwhile, Americans continued to grapple with questions of identity, unity, and the nation's future direction. America, at 250 years from colonial settlements to a global superpower, from independence to civil war, from industrial might to digital dominance, from hardship to triumph. The story of the United States is one of reinvention, struggle, innovation, conflict, and hope. Through revolutions, wars, crises, and transformations, America continues to evolve, shaped by its people, defined by its ideals, and driven by an enduring belief in a better future. A panorama of America. Cities, mountains, farms, coastlines. The United States enters 2025 not as a perfect nation, but as a resilient one, still debating, still dreaming, still striving to live up to the promise written at its birth, that all people are created equal and that a more perfect union is always worth pursuing.